Uh, Hello, everyone. I'm Pete Kolbenschlag. Whoa, probably don't need that, maybe. I'm Pete Kolbenschlag. It's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker. I'm very interested in the nexus between creativity and activism. I believe that stories and narratives and creativity and communicating that way is a really important way to help identify problems and to also help envision solutions. My role in this event has been limited, but I wear a lot of hats. Professionally, I work with nonprofits on a lot of environmental issues, climate change, oil and gas, public lands. I'm interested personally in promoting more sustainable human systems and the stewardship of the resources that sustain us. I'm a founder of the Colorado Farm and Food Alliance, which is one of the groups supporting this symposium, and we work to connect the farm-to-table movement with opportunities for climate action and to protect our healthy lands and clean waters. We also work to support sustainable rural economies. As an organizer, I believe community-based solutions provide for impactful action. It's often a slow and steady approach, but over time, I think it builds for what's really sustainable progress. My philosophy of change accepts the steady-on nature of the work, and it's also founded in an ethic of place. It's good, I think, to be intentional about the space around us. I believe that cultivating an ethic of place could, by extension, go a long way towards addressing even the largest problems. When we think about sustainable rural communities, we cannot escape. It often comes down to the economics. Growing strong communities requires an investment in those who are willing to take the risks. And again, local solutions can help meet this need. A local example is a partnership between the North Fork and the Roaring Fork Valleys, the Two Forks Club, which provides a model of cooperative funding to support local farms and food businesses. And that brings me to our keynote speaker, Woody Tasch, author of Slow Money and Soil. Both these books cover the importance of nurturing local systems of capital investment for healthy, resilient communities. Woody's also founder of the Slow Money Institute, which is the parent of Two Forks Club, and it's a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing the flow of capital to local food systems, connecting investors to the places where they live, and with promoting new principles that bring money back down to earth. Down to earth, an ethic of place, taking care of our space to build local communities that are viable and resilient. Although the North Fork is a community in transition, that's not only a vulnerability, it's also an opportunity and a challenge. As we imagine and implement a way forward, we can see how all our endeavors come together. They're a shared effort. And that at the heart of all of it is creativity, the ability to imagine and to create solutions, to fashion something new, newly relevant, newly purposeful, out of the material and the pieces, out of the capital we already have here at hand. So with that, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Woody Tasch.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So since that introduction focused on the Two Forks Club, and there's a 3-minute video that I wasn't sure when I was going to use it, so I think I'll just start with that. And it's from the movie How We Grow. Has anybody here seen the movie? I'm just curious. Okay, check it out. It was done by a woman who's grew up in Basalt, and it won. I'm probably butchering the prize. I think it won Best Film at the Colorado Environmental Film Festival in Golden a few months ago. It's gotten a little bit of recognition, and it's all about the local food system in the Roaring Fork Valley and over here. The Two Forks Club is the Roaring Fork and the North Fork of the Gunnison. And they put together this little 3-minute thing that's, Slow Money is in there kind of woven through the film, but they did a little 3-minute thing that just highlights Slow Money and the Two Forks Club, so enjoy this.
club because there's a gap that needs to be filled. These young people in this valley are amazing entrepreneurs, hard workers, committed to the land, to bringing the soil back to life, and committed to bringing food safety to this valley. Being a part of that, it excites me a lot. And plus, I get a lot of good food.
We got the money to build this through the Two Forks Club's Slow Money loan.
Slow Money is a network of folks around the country who are collaborating to put some of their money into local food systems.
There's so many other returns on your money. Woody and I decided, wouldn't it be great if there was a club that gave 0% interest loans to local food entrepreneurs?
Well, the way that it works is members make a $150 contribution if they're a farmer or teacher, or a minimum of a $250 contribution if they're anybody else. That goes into our general pool. At our quarterly meetings, a farmer or food entrepreneur will stand up in front of our group and pitch their proposal. We collectively make a choice based on what will make the greatest impact on our local food economy. The loans then get paid back, go back into our fund, and circulate for future loans.
I'd like to encourage everybody to become part of this club. It's important for our community.
It allows so many people to have careers that are so impactful for all of us.
The thing that's beautiful about this club, compared to any other slow money club around the country, is everyone put in whatever they could afford to put in. This is really unusual. Everyone still only gets one vote. Very cool.
This is the start of getting people to have what they need to get their hands dirty and try.
In the last 3 years, we have loaned $120,000 to 7 local farmers and food entrepreneurs. 100% has been paid back on time or early, and 50% of all the loans that we have made, the loanees have come back to become members of the Two Forks Club.
We're wanting to give a leg out to the young farmers in both the Roaring Fork and the North Fork Valley.
I have to say, I sit in those meetings, I am like moved to tears sometimes, and I look at these young kids, and it's really inspiring. For the amount that you give, your impact is so huge.
Members were really excited about their return being more than money, a lot more than money.
The backbone of our business is building a local food economy that supports local food production for everyone.
This year we were able to get a loan for a walk-behind tractor. With that piece of equipment, we've been able to reshape all our beds. We doubled our size this season, so.
I love knowing that they're in our valley. Hopefully we'll be eating more and more of their products over time.
To me, this is the path to food safety, food security, supporting our local farmers in any way we can.
All donations are 100% tax deductible. Please consider becoming a member today. We're a 501c3 nonprofit and could really use your support.
So that footage was shot over a year ago, so those numbers are now, I'm going to get some feedback here, are now out of date. So the club now, that club now has 55 members, has the pool has grown to about $320,000 over 4 years. It's taken 4 years to get that much money and coming in, some of it coming in each year. And we've lent out now over $200,000 to about a dozen things. And I say we, I'm the only person in the club who isn't from here because I collaborated with Susan to start it. And now, and there's another thing in that that is not accurate, I haven't looked at that in a while. It is now not the only club that is doing that because we just started another one in Boulder called, I'm kind of giving away part of the talk here, Slow Opportunities for Investing Locally. Anybody know what that spells? Soil. So the title of my book is actually meant to be a double entendre. It's got two meanings. It's about the actual soil and the vision of bringing money back down to earth. And it's also, the last quarter of the book is about the soil project in Boulder. And I'll say more about the book as we proceed. So because we're where we are, and meaning in Colorado, I just came here via Alamosa, Pagosa, Durango, Telluride, and Hotchkiss, kind of using this book as an excuse to continue doing organizing to make more of this stuff happen. And it's an unusual pleasure for me to be talking about the book at a conference where everyone's talking about art and environmental activism. So I don't have to kind of apologize for the artistic intention of the book. Usually the artistic intention of the book is either a curiosity, that's when people have intellectual curiosity. Then there are the other people who go, what the hell are you putting poetry in a book about money for? And it'd be one thing if it was just poetry about money. It's poetry about money, but we're still trying to do something, where the poetry is leading to action. So what I did during lunch is I kind of put a different slideshow together after I heard the morning stuff. So hopefully this will flow okay. I might jump around a little bit, but I just wanted to try to tailor what I'm sharing with you today to do a couple of things. One is kind of trace a little arc that I have never gotten to do in public before about how I've gradually been using poetry more and more to try to change, dare I say it, capitalism. But focused around bringing money down to earth and local food systems. That's always the action. And so I will, during this presentation, modulate, I guess I'd say, bounce around between big ideas and concrete actions. The big ideas could just be ideas about economic history and capital markets and globalization. Some of them will be about art and M.C. Escher. But whatever I say about all that stuff, it's always disciplined by we're actually, the goal of this is, and it's just a perfect segue after all the talks this morning, so thank you for organizing it that way. This is about imagination. This is about, and actually the two parts of this book are called, the first part is called Poetically Incorrect. And that is it's good that you're laughing, because there is a lot of humor in the book, and it's always good when people get it. And that's because my first book, which was called Inquiries into the Nature of Slow Money, that came out 10 years ago, did spark this something called the slow money movement, and I do have a bunch of slides in here just tell you what's going on in slow money around the country, just kind of a brushstroke, so you'll see the context that will then allow us to drop down to talk about here. And somehow while I'm doing that, I also want to have the fun of sharing some of the poetry in the book and some of the artistic intent, because this is like my ice book. You know, it's not an ice, but it's in poetry, and we are using it to make something happen. So, so just bear with me as I kind of wander through that story. I think I'll just kind of go through it. And I might have to jump around a little. I'm not sure, so just bear with me. I hope I got them in the right order. So this is the cover of the book, and just from the cover of the book, something should be apparent. So it's soil. The stuff in white is meant to be the official title of the book. So soil, notes towards the theory and practice of nurture capital. And nurture capital is kind of a big idea. I mean, big in quotes. Meaning if you have venture capital over here and philanthropy over here and there's nothing in the middle, what's missing is what I'm giving a name now called nurture capital. And the slow money movement started around the idea of just slowing money down, meaning thinking longer term, ignoring all the algorithms and all the other crazy stuff, at least with a tiny bit of our money and attention, and focusing on what's going on right down the street with the local farming. So I'm probably going to say these words several times during the talk. Small and mid-sized diversified organic farms. So if we want there to be more small and mid-sized diversified organic farms, and then we could all, not everybody here is into the food thing necessarily, but I think everyone here cares about the environment by definition, and therefore you probably are somewhat aware of the role that food and farming plays. Since we're going to talk about poetry a little bit, poet Gary Snyder, who I'm sure most of you know his work, probably said the pithiest sentence about the importance of farming and the connection between farming and environmentalism. He said, food is the field in which we daily explore our harming of the world. I mean, think about that. Actually, while we're doing really cool sentence, I'm going to repeat that. Food is the field in which we daily explore our harming of the world. Most people don't think about agriculture as harming the world. Turns out it is. It has been. And the whole thing with regenerative, organic, biodynamic, all these new ways of thinking about farming is, can we grow food without harming the world? That's not even getting to the issue of harming the people who eat the food because the food isn't nutritious. That's like a whole nother, we're just talking about in the soil, with the water, with the air. Some of you might be surprised to hear that one of the greatest environmental challenges on the planet is the plow. When you plow soil, it breaks soil organic matter down and releases carbon into the atmosphere. So when I say that the opening sentences of my book are, just try to get them right here. Well, the first one might seem slightly irrelevant. I'm sad as hell and I'm not going to fake it anymore. Second one is, our democracy is ebbing and carbon is flowing into the atmosphere, that is, instead of back into the soil where it belongs. So farming has been, since it started 10,000 years ago, degrading the environment. And we're now seeing, and you're going to hear a ton more. I mean, soil's been mentioned, obviously, several times today already. A whole big topic that's going to gain lots of traction in the years ahead is soil and carbon sequestration. And again, because this is an environmentally active group, I know you've heard about the issue. There's a lot of questions about like how much and how fast and could it do this and could it reverse climate change and all of these. There are some pretty bombastic claims out there, some from good friends of mine, ours, some who are based in Boulder, that if everybody did this, we could actually go back to pre-industrial levels of carbon in the atmosphere, blah, blah, blah. But whatever those, we don't need to debate like specific projections. We just want to acknowledge the way systems are working and think about directions that are healthier. And so you're going to hear a lot more about organic, regenerative, biodynamic, and whatever other words are dreamt up. I was actually talking to my friend Lance Hansen, who's in the back. There's actually a thing that, actually I'm just going to share a cockamamie idea with you, and it might turn into a real thing. You might hear that we're having a conference like next April in Boulder called AHA, A-H-A. We haven't decided to do this yet, but there's a funny little thing in the book, and it says, regenerative, sustainable, restorative. These are all multisyllabic, fairly complicated terms, and we have to debate certification and all these things. Aren't we just talking about healthy? We want healthy agriculture and healthy people. So I thought Americans for healthy agriculture, AHA, which leads me to the other part of it. It's almost like I prepared this, but I assure you I didn't, and you will be convinced of that as we proceed. The playful subtitle is Of Earthworms, Billionaires, Aha Moments, and that's what the aha is. Just that realization in the book. Oh, aha, we just want healthy agriculture. Mythic implications and the considerable virtues of bringing our money back down to earth. Not all of it, of course, but enough to matter. Now, hopefully from the way that is written, if I tell you that I figured out that the style of my writing is called lively serious, as opposed to deadly serious, the cover is meant to be a clue to anybody kind of thinking about going further. All right. So let's see what we got here in the slideshow. All right, so that's just to remind you that it's not just me talking about a book, it's about a movement called Slow Money. And so the first couple of slides are just to give the arc of the slow money movement outside of Colorado, just the whole thing. So basically this sentence summarizes the theme of the first book. As it circulates the globe with ever-accelerating speed, money sucks oxygen out of the air, fertility out of the soil, and culture out of local communities. And when I first wrote that sentence, I just meant it as kind of a frame, just a way of thinking about the problem, not as a literal description of a process. And as the work unfolded, it became clear it's actually a literal description. It's not really sucking oxygen out of the air per se, but it's degrading the atmosphere, so it's close enough. The book ends with a little, there actually is a little poetry. Wait, I don't need to read it yet. This is a little bit this arc of poetry in my career, and just sharing with you using the art form of poetry to be an environmental activist, or a fiduciary activist, which is a category that doesn't actually exist yet, I don't think. So there actually is a couple of page poem in this book towards the end, and then it ends with this other little quirky thing I'm going to show you in a second. But in my experience, well, I can say nobody, and I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people about this book and all the issues in it, no one has said, how come you put poetry in there? It's never come up. And I think it's because people just kind of didn't want to deal with it. It was like, oh, whatever, he's indulging himself, and he's not really a poet, he just stuck a few things in there. So I'm not reading the longer poem from the couple of page poem, but at the end, there's this little quasi-poem, and it reads, circulation versus percolation, monoculture versus diversity, transaction versus relationship, profitability versus fertility. Now, there is a rhyme in there, therefore I'm allowed to say it's a poem. I will hasten to add that it is a fiduciary poem, and therefore it's kind of a crappy poem. But as an organizing thing, it's actually the words matter, because the words on the left are the old paradigm, is the industrial agriculture paradigm. which is a reflection of the industrial financial paradigm. People don't usually use the words industrial finance, so we say industrial agriculture. I think of finance the same way. It's industrial finance. These are two sides of the same coin. So we're trying to move from circulation, monoculture, transaction, and profitability towards a paradigm that would prioritize percolation, diversity, relationship, and fertility. Okay. As things kind of heated up after the first book came out, people said, well, not everyone's going to want to read a book. You got to put it in one page. And I'll just state right now that you will know without any doubt, shred of doubt when I'm finished, that I hate elevator pitches. But the slow money principles, which is a one page, is the closest thing I'm willing to do to an elevator pitch about slow money. And there are 6 principles. By the way, everything, if you want to find out more about slow money, go to slowmoney.org, and there's all kinds of stuff about what we're investing in and who's doing what where, the groups all over the country, all that stuff. But we have 6 slow money principles. The first one is we must bring money back down to earth. And if this was a slow money meeting, we would discuss what that might mean to you and whether it's a good idea or how we would do it. But since we're here to talk about broader issues, I just put the last of the slow money principles. Is Paul Newman said, in life we need to be more like the farmer who puts back into the soil what he takes out. Recognizing the wisdom of these words, let us ask, what would the world be like if we invested 50% of our money within 50 miles of where we live? What if there were a new generation of companies that gave away 50% of their profits, and what if there were 50% more organic matter in the soil 50 years from now? And you will immediately know that the 50-50 thing is not scientific. It's just kind of it's about balance. And it's also, to me, it's like, are we going to figure out what we need to figure out in time? The odds are at best 50-50, but we're all going to do the best we can. I might just add a couple of little quirky footnotes to that. That sentence from Paul Newman is the last sentence of his obituary in the New York Times. And that's why it stuck. I just got goosebumps when you all did that. That's why it stuck in my mind when I read it, because and then that obituary was the entire page of the New York Times. It wasn't like a regular, it was the entire story of his life. And you get to the end, and he just said, in life, he said, someone once told me, and then he says, in life we need to be more like the farmer. And that's what they decided to be his last sentence. The first 50-50 thing, which kind of got me on this little roll, I came up with when I was CEO of something called Investors Circle, which is a national angel network, angels being high net worth investors doing private investing. And we were trying to do the right thing. And we did steer a couple $100 million into over 300 deals over about 25 years. It's still going, Investor Circle. You can check that out. I was chairman and CEO for 10 years. And writing the book, actually, that first book, came from me taking a year off from it. Well, it ended up being 6 years. But I was in New Mexico. You know what it's like. I thought it was a year, but it ended up being 6 years. But the first year and a half were spent writing that book. I took some time off to write, and the reason it came out as Inquiries into the Nature of Slow Money, Investing as if Food, Farms, and Fertility Matter, that's a subtitle, was because I was trying to figure out why the richest people in the richest society on planet Earth could only get a trickle of money into things we cared about in for-profit businesses. The same thing actually applies in philanthropy, but that's kind of a corollary story. And gradually I was just trying to kind of pare it down, and I came down to we got to think longer term, we got to invest with much more patience for the long term, and that's where the slow part came. And then the second part of the thought was, what's the longest term vision of healing? And that would be healing the soil, about which we've already heard a bunch, and you're going to hear some more. So I just wanted to highlight where the 50% profits is just kind of a riff on Newman's own 100%, 1% for the planet. You're going to hear some more about this as I proceed, so I'll just keep going here. Some of you have been to slow money meetings, I think. I see a few of you. And I always actually start my slow money meetings with this hog, which is a Nyman Ranch. It's a little bit out of focus. I apologize for that. I dropped it in from a different deck. That's a Nyman Ranch hog, if any of you know the company Nyman Ranch, which pioneered sustainable hog husbandry in small family farms. So this hog was raised on, let me see if I get the numbers right. I haven't thought about this for a while. It's 1,000 hogs on 150 acres. Okay. think about that number for a second, versus a hog confinement unit where you'll have 5,000 or 10,000 hogs on a half an acre in a barn, in a crate, shot full of antibiotics and blah, 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 blah. I hope most people here know something about industrial meat production. So this is the opposite. And I put the slide up. And again, since people coming into the room about just slow money, already have a pretty deep self-selected interest in food systems, and so they know all about industrial food production. You don't have to get into all that. And I just ask us, those of us in the room, to stare this pig in the face. And that's the language I use. I've written an essay called Staring the Pig in the Face. And we can joke, it's a capitalist pig. It's a free-range capitalist pig. Let's get that out of the way. All right. And just think for a minute about what the impact of our investing is, where our money is, on how it's affecting all other living things on the planet. So let's just do it for a second. So those ideas and the book and all the stuff I just described led to something called the Slow Money Movement. We're now in our 10th year. It's just a bunch of people meeting a lot all over the country. It's important to say that because there's no slow money fund. We don't take any transaction fees. We're not fiduciaries. I use the language all the time, as non-fiduciary as possible, meaning this is about decentralized, direct, community level, participatory investing / action. We're just trying, I'm going to say it again, we're trying to get some of our money in the hands of small and mid-sized diversified organic farms near where we live. And not just the farms, but any small business. It could be a baker or a seed company or a farm-to-table restaurant. Any business that's also helping get the produce of the farmer into the local market. And that's the way it happens. You heard the number 28 before. That's 17 networks, 11 clubs. I'll say more about the clubs in a second. You don't need to worry about these numbers. I just wanted you to see a map and see that it's happening all over the country, and a few in Canada and France. That's what that key on the side means. And a little tiny dot starting in Australia now. And you know, some people have noticed. I mean, that's Bill McKibben saying slow money is one of the keys to a healthy future. So now back to the book. So after 10 years of that, so I hope that was a useful little journey through just the bigger picture of slow money. About 6 years ago, I moved to Boulder. When I moved to Boulder, I became the 13th member of the Slow Money Investment Club that had already been started in Boulder. And up until that moment, I had not started a single thing in the slow money movement myself. I was living in the mountains of New Mexico. I'd written the first book. I was going around speaking. And stuff was percolating all over the place. And there wasn't enough critical mass, or I didn't know how to do it, one of those two, in northern New Mexico to start a group there. So I was just running around sprinkling these seeds all over the country, and stuff was happening. It was kind of amazing. And then I came to Boulder, and I went, oh, I get to join a slow money club. So I was member 13 of the Slow Money Club. We got it up to about 26 or 27 people. And I guess the reason I'm telling you all that at this moment is I knew that I had to write a second book at some point because I was having this conversation with lots of people. I mean, lots of people. And I can just report to you that it is my, I would think, informed opinion at this point, that there are millions of people who are indirectly interested in this conversation. Something like this happening, meaning how do we support the next generation of small and mid-sized diversified organic farms, given all the headwinds that are still going against them and us. And so this book is what came out when I finally had the wherewithal to stop for another year and try to pull back and just reflect the energy of all those conversations back. And I want to, and I know I'm kind of, because this isn't scripted, you're going to hear me go through a few loops. I just want to say again, the conversation part of this, the idea part, us sharing what's broken in food and finance and our culture and why this could be, how important are local food systems, what about elitism, what about the cost of food, what about, there's a million questions that come up. They come up all the time. They're never going to go away. But we're talking about a direction, facing in a direction and starting to move in a direction with some money. It's not just poetry and ideas, and it's not just a conversation. It's taking some money and doing something with it. And it's not just doing something, it's giving it to people who are kind of fighting an heroic fight. I mean, those young farmers, some of them won't make it. They're all doing quite well, actually, at the moment. Those are all farmers on the other side of the hill. I'm going to show you a picture of Don and Daphne at Zephyros Farm here. They got the first 2 Forks loan, actually, a $23,500 0% loan to buy a used refrigerated truck. So that's the thing we're doing. We're making loans, usually kind of smallish by today's standards, meaning a few thousand to a few tens of thousands, possibly a few $100,000, and once in a while a few $1 million. There are a few, the few $1 million deals where one family writing a check for a few $1 million a couple of times. But that's the exception. But everyone's allowed in. We want as broad participation as possible, but we also want to make it possible for small funders to participate. And so you're going to hear more about the soil model and the Two Forks model as I proceed. Anybody want to take a guess what that is? Why the numbers there? Reflection. So if you take the word soil and you flip it down like it's on a hinge, it almost makes the number 2017. So now we're getting into the artistic part of the presentation. So when I realized that, when I was writing the book, I kind of had a different kind of aha moment. And so well, let's see how I did these next slides here. Stick with me. So, so the book is extremely artistic. It's very visual. A lot of time and effort was put into it to make it that way, and it seems to be hitting people well, which I'm very gratified for. So there's all kinds of side notes and crazy, interesting side facts and photos and pictures. Sometimes it gets into more technical soil stuff. Not too much technical soil stuff, more activist soil stuff. Sometimes it's more about economics than the soil. So, you know, this page was more about the soil and about how root exudates go through the soil and whatnot. This one's more about the economy. And just for the fun of it, I'm going to read you the side note on the right, side note 35. Barracuda jeans, stick with me here. Barracuda jeans, recently featured at Nordstrom's, are described thus, quote, heavily distressed medium blue denim jeans in a comfortable straight leg fit embody rugged Americana workwear that's seen some hard working action with a crackled, caked on, muddy coating that shows you're not afraid to get down and dirty. This is a true thing. Pre-mudded jeans that sold out at Nordstrom's, and I believe they sold for $295 a pair. Maybe more, possibly more, I can't remember. That's a number that gives you a headache if you think about it. All right, so that's on a page. That's also kind of a lively, serious way of dealing with a serious topic. So up above, that chart up above came from an NGO called Redefining Progress, which for many years, they're not around anymore, but for many years they created a template for educating the public about the disconnect between economic growth and well-being. So the top line is US GDP from 1960 to 2004, and the bottom line is what they call the genuine progress indicator, and they did all these elaborate surveys. There's actually a bunch of groups internationally that are still carrying that on, and all that stuff is in the book. And what you see is what all of us know to be true. We don't feel like we're better off even though the economy is growing. Now, doesn't apply to every single person in the room, because there are some people in the room who might feel a lot better off with stock market, you know, 25,000 instead of 5,000. That's another issue. That's another issue. But in general, I think it seems true to me that the vast majority of Americans, while we understand that economic growth is important, we also understand that a growing economy is not by itself make us better off. There's all kinds of things in the economic growth, like pre-mudded jeans, Tomahawk missiles, cancer treatments, you know, cleanups after hurricanes, ambulance trips after car accidents. Those all contribute to economic growth, selling cigarettes being an obvious one. So economic growth is not synonymous with improved well-being. In fact, many times it's unhealthy. Does anybody think that's a radical idea? No, I know you don't. And to economists, that is still a radical idea. Just like it is still a radical idea to most foundations that they should invest their money in a way which is consistent with the charitable mission of the foundation. That is a true statement, and I speak from experience. I was treasurer of a foundation in New York for 10 years. And which part are you applauding for? Just how crazy it is, yeah. That's like just an eruption of that's crazy applause, yeah. All right. So it's still going on. When I was treasurer of the Jesse Smith Noyes Foundation in the 90s, we set out to take all of the $60 million that we had and said we do not want to have any of it invested in, this I'm giving an actual example. We don't want any of it invested in Monsanto while we're giving grants to sustainable ag groups. And you will sit here and you'll go, what? You mean that was even a thing? You bet it was, and it's still a thing in most philanthropy. There is a very roaring, I don't know if roaring, there's a vibrant discussion that's gone on since the early 90s about how to get foundations to kind of face this cognitive dissonance or this cultural dissonance. And I won't say more about it other than to say it's the same cognitive dissonance that we each face as individuals. So it's not like foundations are alone in this. We have values, we're concerned about things, and yet our money is zooming around the planet because why? We need to make 7% for our retirement account or some reason that we've decided to leave it going to all kinds of places and doing things and we're not sure what it is. And then the whole impact investing and green investing movement has emerged to try to improve on that. But I would say the purest thing I've ever thought of to do, and that I'm pleased to be able to help people do, is take some of our money and give it right to a local farmer. That just short circuits the whole friggin' mess. As soon as your money goes into the friggin' mess, you are probably not going to get it back in a satisfactory, in one piece to do what you want with it. Okay, so the book. Trompe l'oeil, reflection, M.C. Escher. Right? Everybody remember M.C. Escher? M.C. Escher. I mean, has this ever been more needed than right now where black and white, there's literal black and white, and then there's red and blue and fake and real and all kinds of other stuff. So what I take away from M.C. Escher is our job is to see the greater patterns, not to get locked in false choices. That's how that would be my concluding thing on why including M.C. Escher in this book or just reflecting how great he was can help us. See the greater pattern, don't be trapped in the false either or. There's another one, a little closer to what we're talking about, meaning nature, urban, farming. So there's no figure, there's no foreground and no background, it's all one pattern. And so I want to read you a paragraph in the book that kind of explains maybe my bottom line on the title, Soil, a Word over a Number 2017. This is not about numbers, doing these numbers versus doing those numbers. This is about reaffirming the primacy of words over the claims on our attention made by numbers. Reaffirming the primacy of relationships over the claims of transactions. Reaffirming the primacy of nutrition over the claims of cheap calories. Reaffirming the primacy of places over the claims of markets. Reaffirming the primacy of generations and seasons over the claims of milliseconds and algorithms. Reaffirming the primacy of putting back in over the claims of taking out. So I'm sure you all saw all that in the Soil 2017 image, right? So let me see, I don't remember what the next slide is. Okay. So I just put a couple of slides in, and then I'm going to have a bunch about here. Then I'm going to bring it down to Colorado. This happens to be a guy named Jack Laser from northern Vermont. And I have two slides here of just people that I love who are doing amazing things and just represent a whole group of people. So old hippie, went up to northern Vermont, 10 miles from Canada, probably around 1968 or so, stayed, and he and his family are farming 360 of the most sustainable, regenerative farmland I've ever seen, and they have 60 cows, and they make as much yogurt as they can make on that farm, with almost no outside inputs, almost none. And it's $1 million a year business, and it's been that size for about 20 years, because they can't make more yogurt, they can't grow the feed and have the cows and do the thing. So to a professional investor, that is a hobby farm, believe it or not. Doesn't even, because it's not growing, and they're not going to sell it to a public corporation, and so why would somebody invest in it? The only people who might invest in it are people who live within 50 miles and love them and want to see them prosper if they needed to build a new yogurt tank or something. So I just wanted you to hear that as a kind of, and I put Small is Beautiful up there because pretty much everything I'm saying falls under the frame of Wendell Berry and E.F. Schumacher. Now, I think, again, most people in the room will know Wendell Berry. E.F. Schumacher is worth saying something because he wrote a book called Small is Beautiful in 1973, and the phrase stuck around, but the book kind of got distressingly forgotten. And he basically said that that the modern economy was on a collision course with planet Earth. And he was a Rhodes Scholar, industrial economist for the British Coal Board. I mean, a very eminent, successful industrial economist. So when he said it, it would have been nice if anybody had listened. And a few people did, but most economists didn't. And so if you put that into like an axiom, it would be unlimited economic growth on a finite planet is impossible. All right? Now, in a meeting like this, 9 out of 10 people here will agree with that. Not everybody. I'm sure some people here won't agree with that, but most will. But 9 out of 10 economists wouldn't even talk. If you said that, they wouldn't even talk to you anymore. So what are you talking about? Economic growth, innovation. We're going to figure out solutions. We're going to solve our way out of things. We're going to technologically innovate our way out of them. And his other corollary was, whatever you think about that first, about unlimited economic growth on a finite planet being impossible, I think every 10 out of 10 people will agree with his corollary, which is increased consumption is not synonymous with improved well-being. Right? Okay, so that small is beautiful. And that period of time is important because I actually view that what we're doing in slow money is a tiny little thread we're weaving back from the 60s and 70s and bringing it forward to today. So this is Zoe Bradbury. She's in Oregon, other end of the country, Stanford graduate, extremely intelligent, worked for several NGOs, and then said, you know what? I'm just going back to the farm. She went back to where her mother and sister are farming in southern Oregon. They farm 9 acres, mostly with horsepower. And they have a $200,000 a year vegetable business. I'm just saying those numbers because we're talking about money and business. And you're like, what is that? What's a $200,000 farm with a couple of sisters and their mother? Again, forget it to an investor. That's like, whoa, forget it. But to a slow money investor, meaning someone who has a vested interest in the bigger picture of the pattern of which this is a part, this is a beautiful thing. Okay, we're finally down in Colorado. So the Two Forks Club, we've talked about a little bit, and you saw the video. Based on that model, we have now, Tana, raise your hand. I'm here with Tana Schultz, who's on the executive committee of Soil with me. So we've started the second of that model. So I'm going to say more about the model again, just to make sure we're all clear on what it is. People make donations. In the case of soil, it's $250 as a minimum. In the movie, he said $150. That's because we're just tinkering with the model a little bit. And in Boulder, I'm trying to get it to $250,000 a year coming in from 150 people, which we have not accomplished yet. It took me 2 years to get, took us 2 years to get to $236,000 from 78 people. And so we just decided to get going and start making loans. We've made 3 loans. I can tell you more about them if you want. So just think about, just feel this and what it would be like to be part of this. So we have people who've contributed the minimum, $250. In Boulder, we're allowing farmers to join for $25. That's a little innovation we've introduced because we don't want to take money from farmers, but we do want everybody in the club to have to write a check. So other than farming, the minimum is $250. There's no maximum. And in Boulder, we've gotten donations leaving the farmers out from $250 to $50,000. Okay? The reason the range is important is each person only gets 1 vote, no matter how much the money they put in. So we have a $250 donor sitting next to a $50,000 donor, and they each get 1 vote in response to, make believe I'm a farmer, I just came in and pitched you and said I want a hoop house, and I need $7,000 for that, and $3,000 for irrigation, whatever, and then I leave and you vote on whether you're going to give me the loan. Those votes are 1 person, 1 vote, whether you're the $50,000 or the $250 or a $25 farmer. So that's the model. It feels like it's going to replicate a little bit. There's already interest in Virginia. I'm going out there in November where they want to start another soil. And the Two Forks Club was named before this name before that aha moment happened. So we'll see. I mean, people might want to name them different things. I'm kind of hoping the soil model might hold a little structure to it and might just make it a little easier for other communities to do more of this. The other thing that's really important about the model, and I'm about to show you examples of people who have gotten loans. So we'll go from the ideas down to the actual farmers and others that we're helping. If you think about this over a 25-year period, which again, from a professional investor, that seems kind of cockamamie, but from a community member or a parent or grandparent perspective, that doesn't seem so cockamamie. And from the soil perspective, it's definitely not. We want to do it for a long time, and very gradually, if you keep getting money in the top in donations, the people put the money in, just get a tax deduction. That is your only financial return. In other words, it's not really a financial thing. It's more of a philanthropic thing, except it immediately turns into an investing thing because you're making loans to farmers with the same money, and you're participating in the decisions. So you make the loans, you lose some of them, but you get most of them back. And you just do that for 25 years, you're going to have millions of dollars of loans and kind of an interesting community resource in which hundreds or thousands of people are involved. That's the hope. We're just about to launch I showed this slide last year in Boulder, and everything, so it took us a while to do all this. So we're about to launch a communication campaign called 0% for Soil, which you will note is a playful riff on the 1% for peace and 1% for planet, meaning it's not about the money that comes in the top, it's how we're giving the money out. We're giving the money out in 0% loans. It's not about taking 1% in, it's about how it goes out. So stay tuned, you may hear a little bit about that. That's going to be on the Front Range primarily for Boulder, but you know, these are the things getting money. In just in the interest of time, I'm going to speed through these slides a little bit, but if you want, when we chat, we can go back to this. Mountain Flower Goat Dairy in Boulder. It's a nonprofit teaching goat dairy that has a raw goat milk CSA, among other things. Ozuke Fermented Foods. Some of you might know the product. They source all their cabbage from local organic growers on the Front Range. They don't sell all locally, though. They sell nationally through Whole Foods and other companies. Revision, Westwood Food Cooperative. They've been working on this for quite a while. They're trying to start a food cooperative in the inner city, in Denver's poorest zip code. They got $50,000 voted by the participants in Slow Money's meeting in Boulder in 2013. Mark and Kenna Guttridge, Olin Farms. The names of the farms won't mean anything to you because these particular farms happen to be in Boulder. A small, deeply organic, regenerative, whatever you want to call it, farm in Longmont. Poudre Valley Community Farms in Fort Collins, really interesting thing. They've organized a co-op in which I'm not sure what the numbers are exactly now, but they've got more than 100 investor members of the co-op who've each put in $2,500 to enable Nick and Katie, who are the farmers, to purchase a piece of land and manage it for the benefit of the community as an incubator for new farms and whatever. So it's basically going to be a multi-stakeholder co-op with farm members, consumer members, and investor members. And they have closed on a piece of land, and it's a real thing. It's happening. So if it succeeds, meaning if the model 5 years from now looks great, I hope this will happen in a lot of places because it's a community way of buying a farm and getting a bunch of young farmers on there. By the way, their insight, Nick and Katie's insight was, they're like acolytes of Elliot Coleman, you know, doing intensive greenhouse cultivation in the winter. Elliot Coleman, a former board member of Slow Money, I'm proud to say, iconic small farmer from Maine. And Nick and Katie were smart enough to realize, said, you know what, we're never going to be able to afford to own farmland. We just have to forget about it and figure out some other way that we can farm for 30 years until we get burnt out and leave something behind and make a good and hopefully, you know, make a good living while we're doing it. And so once they had that aha moment, they said, how would we team together with members of the community to have the community own the land? It's the basic idea, so stay tuned on that one. This is Don and Daphne from Zephyrus Farm right over there somewhere, maybe 5 miles away or something, maybe less. So that was the first loan from Two Forks Club. That was the first 0% loan, $23,500 so they could get a refrigerated truck to deliver the production from their 2 acres of certified organic flowers. It might be a little more now, actually, I haven't asked them lately. But at the time we made the loan, they had 4 acres. 2 acres in certified organic vegetables and 2 acres in certified organic flowers. And they couldn't get the flowers as far as Vail because they didn't have a refrigerated truck. That was the first loan Two Forks made, $23,500. Oh, and the number, what Ed and Vardy said in the video, that we haven't had a loss is no longer true. We have had 1 loss. But we've made a bunch more loans that weren't in that video. So we've made, I don't know what we're up to exactly, it's probably close to 15 total loans now in the club. And the one that we lost was for, there was a small retail food co-op on the main street in Carbondale. Some of you may remember that. It was called Dandelion. And they lost, they didn't only lose their lease, they lost the whole piece of land and the building got knocked down. You know, it was just one of these horrors of gentrification stories. So they didn't have a place to go and they scrambled and we lent them $10,000 while they were scrambling and we all looked at each other and said, you know, we're probably going to lose this money. There's a high chance we're going to lose this money. So we got to do it. So that's the thing. When you do as non-fiduciary as possible and it's community and it's your community, you might decide to do something that looks a little crazy from a traditional standpoint, but that doesn't mean it's wrong to do it, as long as you have a structure that makes sense. Someone said yeah? Yeah! Yeah! In the 60s, we would have said, right on, motherfucker. Oh, sorry. All right. But it isn't the 60s anymore. All right. And this is Harper and Christian from Two Roots Farm. So they used to run Rock Bottom Ranch Farm as part of Aspen Center for Environmental Studies. So they had quite a few years of farm experience. They went out on their own. This was their first 1.5 acres of micro farming, you know, like a micro farm, if you want to call it that. And that, when you heard in the video, we got the money for the hoop house. I mean, that was their hoop house. They're now on 5 or 6 acres in Emma. They're actually growing their business. They've got access to more land and whatnot. Fantastic young farmers. That's it. So that's it. That's the story of slow money. And now I am going to read a few more paragraphs from the book, and then I'm done. Good? All right. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I hope we're going to have a lively, serious leads to lively discussion. So I did say the style was lively, serious, so I wanted to read you a passage that I hope you will agree is lively, serious. So there are 4 chapters in the book. So the arc of the book is as follows. And again, because we're here to talk about art, I want to tell you the structure of this work of art. It starts with a 20-page poem called Poetically Incorrect, which I describe as quasi-mythic, and that's why the mythic is on the cover, the word mythic. So the story in the poem is a bunch of gods, demigods, goddesses, and one real person getting together by devil's thumb in the Continental Divide to see if they can save humanity. And all that happens in the poem is they convene, and they sit around a fire and share a few thoughts, and then the night falls, and you don't know what happens. Now, just hold that crazy thought for a second, and then the book ends with so that's 20 pages to the beginning, and then it ends with a 20-page photo essay of farmers and chefs in Boulder County who are doing the right thing on the ground. So it starts with this imaginative, crazy out there, and it ends down on the ground. And in between are 4 chapters that examine our ideas about money and what's going on with the soil and what it would mean to put back in as much as we take out. So chapter 2 is called Return, and here's the opening of the chapter. Salmon return. Boomerangs return. Hindus return. When things work out, investments return. Letters with insufficient postage return. So do infections, mosquitoes, prodigal sons, wandering eyes, sideways glances, the hands of a clock, circular reasons, not quite infinite seasons, pendulums, memories, criminals to the scenes of their crimes, and stories to where they left off. Prior to the advent of colony collapse disorder, bees returned. Heroes, real and mythic, return. Odysseus, Columbus, General Douglas MacArthur. Too many winks, verdicts, and tennis serves have been returned over the course of human history to be counted. The same goes for sweaters after Christmas. And as long as there have been neighbors, economists, democratic entanglements, and governments, there have been many happy returns, diminishing returns, election returns, and tax returns. Why does everybody laugh at the words tax returns? I think we're all a little nervous. Through it all, however, through all these physical, spiritual, emotional, postal, historical, mythical, electoral, recreational, and commercial goings and comings, there is one thing in our infinite industrial wisdom and pioneering spirit that we have not returned. Carbon. You got it. Carbon. Okay. So that's the opening of the section on return. About a lot more than return of money, but the whole issue of return. And I want to wrap up by reading you a verse of poetry. Before I do, I wanted to, since nobody shouted out, who's the one real person in the poem, I'm just going to tell you that it's Masanobu Fukuoka, who I know some people here are going to know who he is. One Straw Revolution, so a deep organic farmer, philosopher from Japan. He's not alive anymore. He had a following in the US too. And he wrote a book called One Straw Revolution, really describing how to farm in as wild and natural a way as possible. And the sentence, probably the seminal sentence from the book, which I have him saying around the campfire here, is the true purpose of farming is not the growing of food, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. So, beautiful thing. All right, so they're all sitting around the fire, the gods, the goddesses, and Masanobu. They're saying a few things, and then they're sitting in silence, and the poem goes into what they're thinking. And so this is the interior monologue of the goddess Symbiosis. Symbiosis was mentioned a couple of times this morning, so it was good. It was a good lead-in. And before I read this, because I'm going to stop after I read it, it's like, why on God's earth, or Gaia's earth, would you try to write such crazy poetry about money? And it's because of the word myth, to me. I mean, I think we are at a place where things are so broken and our cognitive dissonance is so deep that it's perfectly all right to actually think about, like, were the ancient Greeks right? Probably. You know, the invisible hand of Adam Smith, that's a myth. That is a myth. It is a really powerful myth. that everybody just doing the best for themselves will automatically create the most good for the most people. And maybe it was true in the 19th and 20th centuries, maybe. In the 21st century, that is a myth that doesn't apply anymore, in my opinion. So that's where all the play is coming from. So here's the interior monologue of the goddess Symbiosis. Then sighed Symbiosis, sighed as an exhale. Then sighed Symbiosis. North of thought and south of emotion, her inner workings word. Echo traded stories with memory. Whisper of sweet nothing exchanged secrets with mysterious attraction. Everywhere, two sides were looking for no coin. Root exudate and colloidal cation. Concentration and diffusion. Ultrabiological infusion and subterranean collusion. Osmotic acceptance and conjugal embrace. Last call and first impression. Mycorrhizal make-believe and microbial commotion and then some. All conspiring on fecundity's behalf. In earth as it is in humus. Overly mysterious and underly obvious and utterly pervious, as if, from her right amygdala to left, a curious, fearless arbitrage of flight and fight, after flowing for so many millennia, had suddenly ceased without a trace. Symbiosis. So thank you all. Are there any questions? Oh, come on. We know there are questions. Yes.
I'm so glad you're here, Woody. I'm glad that it worked out that you could be here on your circuit through Western Colorado. And I want to remind folks about the economy part of this symposium, about this whole art project that's happened throughout this whole year. And eikos, however you say it, the Greek, economy, ecology.
Oikos, yeah.
And I'm so, again, glad you made it. And I hope people can make the connection about if our economy is able to restructure, as you are offering and proposing, that it will and it can heal the ecology. And in this little valley, we started with the film, Anthracite to Apples. And it had this premise of how we have made money and people need jobs. And now it's the question that I have thought about obliquely, and you have thought about it in your way, is how do we make our economies work so that the things that need to get done get paid for? And so I'm not going to expect you to answer it. I just wanted to bring up this part of the conversation. And also a reminder, simply, that currency is the current that interacts and circulates and makes the world go around. And it's kind of a problem when it bruises, when it ends up in a pool in an unhealthy way. And so I wanted to put those concepts out, and so that people can think about that, that the art of living on this planet in a healthy manner that is regenerative, and that slow money and rebuilding of the soil, and I will offer to folks something that you taught me, that perhaps the rate of interest should be the rate that soil is built. That's what the expectation, people should get more real about their expectation of return on money, is the rate that soil can be built. So just throwing those ideas out, and thank you for coming and putting these ideas into the thought sphere in this valley, because this valley is a little experiment that's going on, and slow money has been part of it.
Mm-hmm. So just because I spoke after the presentation on rivers, we should just focus on the flow comment you just made. So just, at one level, it's super simple. Water flows too fast, it causes erosion. It's called a flood. It's not good, right? Water that is flowing at let's say, an appropriate balanced speed, percolates into the soil and creates fertility. So that's why circulation and percolation were two of the words in my funky little poem before. And all those other things like monoculture, diversity, transaction, relationship, what was the last one? Profitability and fertility, those are all the other sides of that coin, if you want to say the coin has four sides, but whatever. They're all tied together, and they all do revolve around things like the natural cycles. Natural cycles. Nature has a certain pace to it. Gene Logsdon, a really well-known small farmer, writer, philosopher who died recently, wrote a book called At Nature's Pace, just about farming in a pace that was consistent with the pace of nature, which sometimes makes it hard to make money. But it is hard to make money farming. If you think it's easy to be a corn and soybean farmer, especially right this second with the tariffs and all the other cockamamie stuff that's going on, but even independent of that, it's extremely hard to make money as a farmer at any scale. A lot of people who want to kind of poo-poo small-scale organics, saying it's elitist and it can never feed the world and everything, that's a whole other issue. It's not true. It is true that it's a little bit elitist at the beginning because we're trying to bring the pendulum back, but it is not true that you can't feed the world that way. But people who want to poo-poo it, oh, you can't make a living here. Here's a quiz. Since you're talking about economy a little bit, I'll just do a little economic thing. A really good small and mid-sized diversified organic farm, how much money will they gross in revenue per acre of diversified vegetable production? Does anybody happen to know that? A really good one, really successful. $20,000 or more per acre. What does the most successful corn farmer in industrial Midwest this year hope he might get for an acre of his corn? I don't actually know the commodity prices right this second, but if he's wildly successful, maybe $1,000, but it might only be $500 per acre. But he has 5,000 acres, so that's $5 million. He's on each acre of his land 45 minutes a year, and that's in like a $600,000 piece of equipment with GPS, satellite, and all the rest of it. The small organic farmer is on, spends weeks on each acre. Yeah, whatever. So it's a completely different paradigm. But the reason those numbers are important, that's the amount of produce that's coming off of that acre. It's phenomenally productive, but it takes a lot more labor. So it's still hard to make a living, but it's doing the right thing and it's healing. And another thing to just mention, since you brought up the economic thing, this is about internalizing, bringing the true costs of this stuff back into the equation. You said I think you said willing to pay more in your comment, right? Which translates to an investor into willing to make less. There's only so many different ways you can pull the dollars, If it stays in your hand, it's not in somebody else's hand, right? So if you leave all the returns in for the benefit of others, that's a pretty good thing. I'll leave it at that, but thank you for the comment, Allison. Yep.
Hey, thanks for being a benevolent force in the world. And also, I just wanted to ask if you had ever come across a farm that was doing no-till like Fukuoka in Colorado.
Oh. Well, I think pretty much every organic farmer that I know in Colorado is trying to minimize tillage. Cool. There's really no such thing as totally no-till. No-till means minimum till. You till as little as possible. So yeah, I don't know of a farm that's like where there's no tillage going on. Except like James Ranch in Durango, which is 400 acres of grass where they're growing cows. So that's a different thing. But in terms of vegetable production,
yeah,
I would just say every organic farmer is trying to minimize plowing and has cut way back over that practices before.
That's great.
Hi there. One of the best insults I heard recently was, I can't trust you, your people bathe in rivers and use pine cones as money. But that sounded like a compliment to me.
Wow, that is like, yeah.
But my question is, as I think about where the world is going, I have an idealism about barter systems, about local monies, and I'm wondering, do you see what you're doing as fitting in with that, or kind of discouraging barter?
No, that's another spoke of the same way. I mean, all of the things that are going on, let's say innovations in finance now, so crowdfunding, microfunding, alternative currency, they're all people trying to redesign the way money is used and flows, right? And I would say a lot of it is around that relationship versus transaction line in that poem. In other words, trying to get away from the pure transaction model back to more relationship, where the two parties of a transaction relate more directly and care about one another more. That's where the nurture and the nurture capital thing comes from. So no, to answer you just a little more specifically, I do say, if pressed, like, how come Slow Money isn't doing more crowdfunding? We tried a few, okay, are you ready? Bitcoin campaigns. Some of you know. Some of you know. I'm trying to remember if any, Poudre Valley Community Farm got a few $1,000s from one of our Bitcoin campaigns. So that was people using crowdfunding to pool some money. In that campaign, we raised $56,000 from 350-ish people. And then everybody who contributed voted. So you can see it was the same ethos as the soil thing. We just did it as crowdfunding. And then two of the recipients were in there. Mountain Flower Goat Dairy won it. They got 46,000 of the 56,000. And then second and third each split a few $1,000s. So we've tried crowdfunding, but we haven't been able to figure out how to do it at scale enough to make it work for us as an NGO. It basically took weeks of our time. It wasn't a business strategy. It was just a fun thing we did, and it was productive, and it worked. But we couldn't figure out how to keep it going. So I'm not against any of those things. They're other things. We're trying to take the crappy US dollars that we have, good old fiat currency, from the Federal Reserve and your local bank, and do something good with it, while everybody else figures out cryptocurrency and all the other stuff. Yep.
I think you're doing amazing work. So I hope my question is really just out of curiosity, couched in that I tried to be plastic free for Plastic Free Month and went like all of 7 minutes maybe without touching plastic. And so when you talk about this 50% of your monies being spent within 50 miles, I was just curious if you've tried it.
Oh my God, of course not. I'm not stupid. I'm just poetic. So thank you for the question. I mean, so I came up with that 50-50 thing, as I mentioned before, while I was running something called Investor Circle. And that was before, maybe I was starting to think about slow money as a thing. We were talking more about patient capital and short-termism, and the Aspen Institute had come out with a study that Warren Buffett and a bunch of other notable people had signed saying we have to think longer term. And so there are a bunch of things percolating along. And one of the threads that seemed very important to me was one of the reasons we can't think long term is because we're not thinking about the places where we live. We're just thinking about markets. If you're just thinking about markets, why would you think long term? You just want to get in and get out, and that's what the market is for. As soon as you bring the place in, it slows everything down. And so that was really meant as kind of like a Zen koan for investors to just wake us up. Now, I would just say it to groups roughly this size of members of Investor Circle, and we would have a debate about what it means. It wasn't like, let's actually try to do that exact thing tomorrow. The spirit of what we're doing is around that, and I actually have gotten more radical in my thinking over the last 10 years. And I'd be willing to join a club of people who wanted to try to do that. I'm not sure it's possible. It raises all kinds of questions. There's like parochialism question, and what if you live in a 50-mile area where it's almost all farms and there aren't enough things to invest in? And there's a million, it's not really meant as a truly practical suggestion. It's meant to like plant a flag to get our thinking to go in a new direction. But thank you for that. Yes?
So it's fabulous what you're doing, really fabulous. And I want to
should we get a microphone down here? Or just to make sure everybody can hear. Where is it?
We have a mic here.
All right, let her do it first. Since she already has the mic, and then I'll bring it down to you.
Mine's really quick.
Yeah.
Woody, I love you. I think you're amazing, and I love the way your brain thinks, and I love that you exist in this world.
As James Taylor responded to that once, it helps that we don't know each other very well. No, anyway.
And every time I hear you speak and hear about what you're doing, I just think, God, I want to get involved with that. And so I'm sitting here today going, I'm going to do it today. So how do I do that? Maybe you covered that already and I missed it. But can I go out in the lobby and give someone a check? How does that work?
Well, the first way, this is going to sound a little pathetic. First way is buy the book, because that book was published by the Slow Money Institute, and all the money comes back into the Slow Money Institute. So that's a small way to just chip something in, and a way that will help give you more food for thought about all this when you go home. Second thing is join Two Forks Club or Soil, depending on where you live. If you live either around here or in the Front Range, and by the way, we would take, if someone wanted to join Soil who lived in Craig, we wouldn't tell them no. We have one family from Helena, Montana, who came to one of the national slow money meetings, heard about the model, and said, "Can we please chip into soil?" So they've chipped in $3,500, even though they live in Helena, Montana. We wouldn't do much of that, obviously. We want it to be all local people, but at the beginning, we're just trying to build momentum. So I would say join one of those two clubs, which will only cost you $150 if you join Two Forks Club and $250 if you join soil. That's a real thing.
I think we have a question.
Yep. Oh, good. Yep.
So, I just want to say it's just so brilliant what you're doing, but I want to ask you about this one question, which is, one time I got to be in India, and I was going from the airport from the plane to the airport, and I paid the guy, and the guy was just so thankful that I gave him this change, and I mean, like, effusively. And I said, well, so what's the big deal? And he said, well, we just had a beggars strike. And I said, what do you mean a beggars strike? And he said, well, the beggars thought that they weren't getting enough money, and so what they did is they took all the change out of circulation, which meant that there could not be any transactions. I mean, which is phenomenal. And so I always think about that in terms of what you were saying about foundations and about this extraordinary new networking sort of mitochondria or whatever you call it about money, which is really brilliant.
Whatever.
So, but what about this one? What about changing the tax laws? Because I mean, it used to be like there was actually a 95% tax rate for individuals over a certain amount during, I think it was Eisenhower's time, and I know during Reagan's time it went from something like, I don't know, 72% to 28%. And so the whole idea of the impetus of people giving more and that people with means, and I know that natural capitalism is trying to work on that, and so is donut economics is trying to work on that, if you know about those guys, but can you, one of the things that I love so much about what you're doing is it's like planting spinach or grass in the cracks in the pavements, and it eventually breaks it open, right? So do you have ideas about how the slow money movement can then percolate up and then shift the way
really
people are thinking?
Very important topic. I would say, I'm sure it's obvious from what I presented that we are not a lobbying or advocacy organization at the national level. We are completely focused on local action. Now, that's not a negative to what you just said. It's just saying, certainly from where we are right now after 10 years and a few thousand people here and a few thousand there and a few $1 million here, I mean, we don't have the bandwidth or the scale to add anything to the other noble efforts that are being made to do things like change the tax, subsidies. Let's say if we talk about agriculture, you'd be talking about possibly subsidies as being a thing of the Farm Bill and different things that are more directly related to agriculture. If we get big, meaning not big like a big organization, but if there are millions of people involved in slow money 10 years from now, of course we're going to be participating in national discussions on policy and stuff. But absent that, and I will say, just speaking for myself, being whatever I said I was, a fiduciary activist or something, I am all about just local, getting the money to work locally, and just within the rules, with the crappy dollars and the existing rules and everything, we have enough room to do what we need to do. This is the thing. This is about behavior change. It's not about legal change. It's not about technological innovation. We need those things, but we're not waiting for those things. So again, it sounds like I'm disagreeing with you. I'm not. It's a kind of a question of sort of pacing and kind of taking your best shot with the resources you have.
So I'd like to ask the last question if I could, and then Woody will be out in the lobby doing a book signing. So I was curious anyways, and then your last answer, the idea that maybe as your network grows, you'll take on or naturally begin to participate more in some policy issues. As the local groups make decisions about who to fund, how much do those discussions come into play as far as we're looking for people that are thinking about how much carbon they're putting back into the soil? Or I mean, are there formal requirements, or is that more of kind of an organic discussion?
So you sort of shifted over to the topic of metrics and impact measurements and stuff, I think, which is kind of another spoke of just ways of extrapolating it, not being so completely like ad hoc and direct and everything. And the answer is nothing formal, but tons informal. Meaning, of course, everybody who comes to us, so if you read the rest of the Slow Money Principles or you read either of these books, you're not going to stay in the room with us if you don't care deeply about carbon in the soil and organic matter and nutrient density and healthy food in the schools and all the things that we all want. So yeah, we pay attention to that. I would say the bigger response, just giving you kind of a systemic answer, is all of the talk about impact investing that is going on under the heading of We want to do all these great things, and we still want to make competitive rates of return. 9 out of 10 impact investors want to make competitive rates of return. So I'll kind of pose a question back to you, and it goes like this. Which is the longer shot? That we are going to deconstruct capital markets and the way money flows through foundations and pension funds and all these things, and get it to do the right thing, or that we can mobilize millions of people at the local level to do the right thing with the existing rules and regs and everything. They're both long shots, so it's not an either or, but everybody else is doing the big stuff, and I think we need to spend more time doing the small stuff.
And as a grassroots activist, I think we actually have more access to that small stuff as individuals. But
so before we adjourn, I have a few very brief, it's very brief, don't worry, lively, serious words. They happen to be the very first words when you open the front cover of the book before you even get to the introduction. And it says, if it's true that we are what we eat, may it also be true that we are not what we tweet.
Thank you very much.